This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 18th of October 2025. Hello there, it's Emma Nelson here, coming to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Welcome. Coming up on today's programme, we'll be going through the news and the culture with journalist and Monocle Radio voice Vincent McAviney. Good morning, Vinny. Good to have you back in the studio. What have you spotted?
Good morning. Well, we're going to be talking Tomahawk missiles and Zelensky leaving empty-handed from the White House. Also, the Epstein scandal rumbles on, taking down fully now a member of the British royal family. How the UK government is trying to get ID cards out via troops, it seems. And also our big parties, the way that museums should be topping up the coffers.
Thank you for that. Then,
from a collection perspective, from discovering artists here in London, we have made this platform possible here, so it stays a reference for a lot of people.
We hear from the director of 154 Contemporary African Art Fair about this week's exhibition in London. And finally, Georgina Godwin will be joining us. She's coming to us from the Cheltenham Literature Festival today. That's all coming up on Monocle on Saturday. First, though, a summary of the news. President Trump says he urged the Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky to make a deal with Russia during a meeting at the White House. Mr. Zelensky had wanted Washington to commit to giving long-range Tomahawk missiles, which would be capable of striking further inside Russian territory. It appears Mr. Zelensky left the US empty-handed. Hamas says the body of another hostage has been handed over to the Red Cross in Gaza under growing pressure to return the remains of all hostages as required under the terms of last week's ceasefire. Hamas says it's committed to the ceasefire but is struggling to access the remaining bodies under the rubble caused by 2 years of Israeli bombing. A group of 64 South Koreans being held in Cambodia on suspicion of involvement in online scams have been repatriated. They now face a criminal investigation at home. And President Trump has commuted the sentence of the disgraced New York Congressman George Santos. He was convicted of fraud and identity theft. Mr. Trump said the former Republican politician would be released from prison immediately, saying he was somewhat of a rogue. And those are the headlines on Monocle Radio. No rogues to be seen in Studio One. Instead, we've got Vincent McAviney, journalist and Monocle Radio regular political commentator, wearing an incredibly crisply ironed shirt.
Yeah.
This is unbelievable.
Small confession, I find ironing oddly therapeutic.
I know many people who do.
Yeah, I just, and I'll never do bulk. Each day I just do one.
Oh, little and often.
Little and often,
How
yeah.
lovely.
And I find it as a good moment to think about the day, what I want to achieve. I find it very strangely, enjoyable.
When was that shirt?
This morning.
Oh, so good.
This morning.
Yeah, that's not been in a wardrobe.
And I had time to do it last night, but I was like, no, because as well, it gets you up. If you think, I've got to build in the time to do this, it sort of makes you, not just hit snooze, it makes you get up.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, anyone who doesn't like ironing, Vinny will be available for shifts. That's the kind of thing that you
The
make
smell of laundrettes as well.
So good.
It's like petrol stations, one of those rogue smells that you actually love.
Yes, and I never can quite understand that. After you've done the washing, why it doesn't smell anything like the wonderful, glorious promise of the tablet that was going to go in a laundrette.
Yeah, true.
It just comes out clean. It doesn't come out
lavender scented.
Yeah. No, I'm not transported to tropical lily houses or anything. I've just got clean pants. Right. How's your week been? Apart from obviously, are we continuing this domestic theme? Because you've been nesting, Vinny.
I have. Yeah, I sort of had back to back. I've been a really busy couple of months, and I took some time out this week, and it's been great. I love autumn. It's like my absolute favourite season. I've had lots of walks. I've bought pumpkins. I've made dinners. I've baked. It's been great.
What have you baked?
I did a crumble.
Nice.
Rhubarb crumble.
Very good.
I tried a new recipe for it in Nigella one.
Okay.
I think it worked. I'm not sure if it's as good as my normal one.
Are you more crumble than fruit or more fruit than crumble?
That is a good question.
Very
I
important.
am a third crumble to 2/3 fruit ingredient.
I'm on that page with you.
But here's the classic. Here's the big thing though: cream and ice cream, or one or the other.
Custard.
Oh, I don't like custard.
Okay, we're
so there
done.
we go.
Right, that's it. That's the end of that conversation. Right, okay, let's have a look at the papers. Vinny, what have you spotted? I mean, maybe we should start with this. George Santos is out, and Donald Trump has described him as a rogue, but not a rogue who should be in prison for 7 years.
Well, George Santos, who goes by many names, including the drag queen Kitara Ravash, is out of prison. He is not a rogue. He is a convicted criminal who was serving a 7-year sentence for fraud. He has a long track record of this and illegal behaviour. The New York Times describing him as a Republican fabulist. I mean, that's just a kind word for con artist. He was basically stealing using credit card details that were given by campaign supporters. And he is beyond a rogue. That is only the categorization that Donald Trump could give. And what we are seeing now is, favors for my friends. And George Santos has been diehard loyal to Donald Trump, and prosecutions for my enemies. The likes of John Bolton, who is he's gone after this week, James Comey, the New York Attorney General as well. Is it Letitia James, who was behind the successful conviction in New York of Donald Trump in April 2024. And I think this is getting pretty dark because he's effectively now doing Watergate every day and out in the open. And by him announcing it, it's taking the sort of power out of it because he clearly has an enemies list and he is going after those people. And I think this sort of shows that, and we can already, and we're seeing now, the likes of Ghislaine Maxwell, who we'll be talking about in a moment as well. She is not singing in prison. She has been shifted to a more luxurious prison where she is serving alongside, the sort of white-collar criminals, the likes of Elizabeth Holmes, who was famous in the Theranos blood testing scandal, and Jen Shah, who was in the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. So she's in a much more cushy place. But there is a sort of bat signal going out for these people now that, like the J6 rioters who he pardoned, if you stay loyal to Trump and plead him, he will, quash your sentence and you'll be out. It's
interesting that the characters whose sentences are being commuted in the case of George Santos and also with Ghislaine Maxwell, they have been convicted, or they have done incredibly unpleasant things. I mean, we're just looking back. There's a really good timeline actually in the New York Times about the rise and fall of George Santos. And he says, Mr. Santos spoke glowingly of the January 6 attacks on the Capitol, saying he'd attended himself and Mr. Trump had been at his full awesomeness that day. This adherence to things that ordinarily would be just absolutely impossible to stomach is incredible.
I mean, the list, this is not a full list, but he claimed wrongly that he was descendant from Holocaust refugees. His mother, he said, had been in the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. He claimed to have been a college volleyball star on a scholarship. He claimed to have extensive Wall Street experience, including from Goldman Sachs. He sort of denied his true origins about the fact that he is from Brazil and had been a drag queen there. I mean, it is just, an absolute out-and-out charlatan.
What do you think that he will do next? Because there then begs the question about the rehabilitation of the criminals who have been brought under Donald Trump's wing.
In our fractured media ecosystem, you don't need rehabilitation anymore. You just need bold, brass face. And he will just simply move into the alt-right sphere, the podcasting sphere, and it's all about clout and clicks, and however much you can get of that is direct money to you. You don't need the old proxies of a broadcast network or a company that makes that kind of content. You can buy some mics off Amazon and you can have a podcast this afternoon. And so, he will, this sort of network of these people, it's whether or not he gets shunned or not by the likes of Candace Owens or Megyn Kelly, or whether they think, nope, this is going to boost my audience because we can have some fun with this and people will click and it slowly gets rehabilitated. But it is another sort of death knell for integrity and trustworthiness in public life.
Let's move on to another story involving Donald Trump and this idea of integrity and in the idea of who has the president's ear. At the start of yesterday, there was an assumption that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky would go to Washington and that there was, dare I say, a hopeful tone that Ukraine would be given Tomahawk missiles, which would allow it to strike deeper into Russia. There is the sense that perhaps Moscow had got wind of this, and suddenly, before you know it, you have Vladimir Putin on the phone to Donald Trump for 2 hours, and then an announcement that a meeting again will take place in 2 weeks' time in Hungary. What then happens is that Volodymyr Zelensky doesn't get his Tomahawk missiles. What he gets is a kind of smoothing down by Donald Trump saying we actually needed Tomahawk missiles ourselves, the whole thing. But that idea that Donald Trump's ear can be bent by the likes of Vladimir Putin, the likes of George Santos, on completely different scales, but the principle's kind of the same, isn't it?
It is always, though, whoever is the last person that talked to Trump. And so the timing of that Putin call was really interesting. And there is some really great reporting in the FT. It came out yesterday about what was going on behind the scenes at the Alaska meeting and how actually Putin mishandled that and lost it. Because, as Steve Bannon says, Donald Trump's entire life is a war against information. And what Putin did after the sort of handshake and the sort of smiles when they went in was he sat Putin down and tried to give him a lengthy, rambling history lesson talking about Ukrainian princes from the 1700s and how he had the bigger claim. Trying to teach Donald Trump is not a successful strategy. And Putin has used that sort of bludgeoning to try and wear down leaders in the past. But Donald Trump took complete difference to this. He did not like it one bit. The lunch was cancelled. Nothing came of that meeting. And I think Putin misplayed it because that's not how you sort of maneuver Trump. You don't build an argument like that using historical detail that he doesn't have because it makes him feel insecure. So this is a sort of change of tack now, and it is very interesting. I had not realised that Hungary in June actually pulled itself out of the ICC because I thought, well, the second that Putin lands for this meeting, he'll need to be arrested. I think it's an extraordinary situation and a bit of condemnation for Brussels that you can have an EU member state inviting a leader who would be arrested in all other EU member states, who is waging a war against a candidate for EU member state. And I do think they need to look seriously at what sanctions they can put on the Hungarian government for, being such now a complete outlier when it comes to the EU position. The EU spending all this money to defend Ukraine, and Hungary sort of welcoming Putin in is another part of this. I think for Zelensky, it shows that really what he maybe needed is a bit like the last time he went to Washington, where you had this sort of like Avengers Assemble of European leaders. You get your Macron, your Meloni, your Keir, all sort of sitting there holding Trump to the fire and listening properly to Zelensky. And I think it just shows that you have to, this sort of shuttle diplomacy to Trump is continuous. They all went to Sharm el-Sheikh the other day. Then they should have all gone to Washington because it's just who is the last person he spoke to.
And that's and again, that keying into the idea of who Trump believes can be a strong man, be a powerful man.
Yeah.
It's generally a man. In fact, I think he said when he was on the stage at Sharm el-Sheikh this week that, people say that I quite like, I don't think he used the word despot, but I think he said, use it, the strong man, the powerful. He says, yeah, I really, really do. And I wonder what his perceived triumph of Peace 2025, what effect that will have had on Donald Trump as he went into discussions with both Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. The desire to be surrounded by the strong man is something, dare I say it, that Zelensky will never do and does not wish to do.
Yeah, he doesn't want that at all because he is fighting against a strong man. And I think it's interesting. I mean, Tomahawks would have been a big, big move. It would have created a massive field for Ukrainians to target in Russia, bases that are so far away from the front line that they could have struck with these missiles. It would have been a game changer. They are expensive. They're over $1 million each, and Putin was clearly very worried about that. Now, the negotiations here, Donald Trump's strategy sometimes can be go to the absolute limit and then pull back and test them on the limit. It had seemed like he was sort of unhappy with Putin. We know Melania particularly has been saying to him, Putin is making you look foolish. But Peace 2025, quote unquote, is another thing that I think is emboldening Trump because he's done, 10 months now back in office. And the sort of stabilizers that were in the first term of the sort of sane heads around him are fully off. And all the things that he has done that he is told would go wrong, there have been some results from them, like the peace plan, tariffs, it was going to destroy markets. Well, so far things are kind of stuttering along. Stock market is up, although there is talk about this bubble bursting broadcasting on AI soon. And so we'll see what he does. I think it's going to be very interesting to watch how Viktor Orban plays things in Hungary. If I was the other EU leadership, I think you should all demand to be there because it is, my guilty pleasure in the pandemic, I've got to say, was Real Housewives of Beverly Hills.
Excellent.
And
where are we going?
Also, well, no, I'll tell you where we're going. You want to understand Trump? Watch that format. It is because every episode ends with a big meal or a big trip together. But basically, in the run-up to that, you have one-on-ones and they brief each other on the attack lines that they want to do. And then there is a big blowout at the dinner, and then by the next episode, they're all back together, things reset. That is Trump's model. He wants big set-piece events like Peace 2025, where he can force everyone to be together. But the key part of that is who has spoken to him last before the set piece.
It's an interesting thing. We're going to go and hear about some art in a moment, but actually that reminds me of an article that I read a few months ago and have actually mentioned out here on Monocle. It's that actually it's not just Real Housewives, it's also wrestling, because he was brought up watching wrestling as a little boy. Late at night, he on his own, and the whole idea of the artifice and the spectacle and the bad guy and the good guy, and the fact that if for 1 minute you let the mask drop, the whole thing will crumble.
The two shows are the exact same. It's such a good comparison. Real Housewives is wrestling with Manolos and Hermes bags. That is, it's artificial characters. It's puffing your chest up and then having these huge clashes. Royal Rumbles in wrestling, a dinner at Sir in Real Housewives. But if the key to Trump is thinking reality TV brain, and it is just what is the last thing you can say to him before a big meeting like that, which is why if you are Ursula von der Leyen and Macron and Keir Starmer, you should be thinking, let's create a really tight game plan for how we go into Hungary. We need to meet him there, and we need to be the final people that speak to him before he goes to see Putin.
We could spend hours trying to decide what Ursula von der Leyen's wrestling name would be. You're listening to Monocle on Saturday with me, Emma Nelson, joined in the studio by Vincent McAviney. We'll be checking in with Georgina Godwin in a bit. She's in Cheltenham at the book festival. But let's have some art now. In London, we've had Frieze London and Frieze Masters this week taking over Regent's Park. There are also art events all over the city. One is 154 Contemporary African Art Fair. It's taken over Somerset House with art from Africa and its diaspora. Well, Monocle's Sophie Monaghan-Coombs went along to meet the founder and director Touria El Glaoui. She began by asking her how the different cities 154 are held in, London, Marrakesh and New York, flavour the fairs in different ways.
So London obviously is our spiritual home. We started here as our flagship fair. We have the chance to be in a city that is obviously an art city in the world, but is also regrouping a lot of European collectors, European institutions. There's a lot of intersection that are met here at 154 for the artist journey, to progress and maybe have the right connection to be seen and be acquired by large collections. I think the connection with Africa is very strong in London as well. There's a history between Africa and the UK. So I definitely think that it's bringing us, first of all, closer to galleries from the continent to be able to participate in an international, platform like 154. But also you have a strong understanding of the relationship between Africa and London, in 154 London. I think there's been a lot of people that have started with us, from a collection perspective, from discovering artists here in London. We have made this platform possible here, so it stays a reference for a lot of people. We have started, with Koyoku as well, an educational program that we do specifically in London. So it's very more, I want to say, educational and given much more gravitas than anywhere of the other two fairs. I think New York, it was first of all an understanding of the bridge that we had to create, in London, that really made us realize how important what we were doing, in terms of giving a voice to those artists from the African continent and the diaspora, and how the US were important in terms of market, in terms of institution, that made us go to New York. In New York, what we found is obviously a very important, collectors group, but also institutional group. It's one of the most important, country for institutions. We also tapped into, this whole diaspora definition where it went beyond, what we're just doing, where we, started including African American artists, but also African Caribbean artists. We became, the platform for a very much larger diaspora than, when we started in London. We also tapped into a very new audience of African American collectors who are very deeply rooted in supporting, Black artists, which also is something very particular there, rather than the rest of the world. And finally, Marrakesh, it's one of those things that has always been part of the journey of 154, was to go back in Africa and to be able to show those artists who are obviously from African descent, back to the continent. I think when we do Marrakesh, we have a different, role as well. We have a huge impact on the city. We have a huge impact on the country itself and their cultural development. So it's also, being at the center stage of, the cultural ecosystem developed, in the city where we do the fair. And we really see the impact we have, bringing the institution to align with what we do, with like making sure that, there's an important, discovery of people coming to Africa to discover artists from the continent rather than African artists always going to the rest of the world.
Our conversation here is being soundtracked by some lovely piano music in the courtyard. Could you talk a little bit about the other aspects of 154, the performance aspects and the live events that are happening and how important they are to the identity of the fair?
So, of course, what you're listening is a part of the installation in the courtyard of Monica de Miranda, which is a fantastic artist. It's a participatory installation. So you have performances, discussions, engagement with the audience that are seeing, or walking around the installation. This has been a very important project, that we couldn't start right away at the beginning, but now that has been going on for I think the past 10 years, which is, letting an artist work in a very ambitious project in the courtyard, so it's often the first time that they do such a large, project. It helps them also, project themselves in a much bigger space. It's often a place that we need to organize a year in advance because, the whole funding and engagement to get an artist to be willing to do this project is very, very different. It takes a lot of preparation. I mean, we love to say that 154, it's a movement, but it kind of like, it's all those little things, the special project, the spaces we give to, project that we need to highlight from the continent, in a more international global stage platform. All those projects are shaping the fair being much more than just a commercial platform.
That was 154 Contemporary African Art Fair founding director Touria El Glawi. You can visit the fair today and tomorrow at Somerset House if you are in London. If, however, you're somewhere else in the United Kingdom, you must go to Cheltenham because Georgina Godwin's at the Cheltenham Literary Festival for us and she's hosting and doing wonderful things. She's also on the radio now. Good morning, Georgina. How are you?
Good morning. To be completely frank, Emma, I'm in my bed and slightly hungover.
Excellent. As opposed to being in the studio and slightly hungover, which is usually. What took you to a super party I'm assuming it's a super party that you went to last night.
Well, because literary festivals are generally very kind of social afterwards, and after you finish up your last session, there's always lots of people around and lots of buzzy things going on. So that's sort of part of it. But of course, you do have to, have enough of your wits about you to make sure that you're completely prepared for everything that's coming.
So speaking of which, I saw a picture of the inside of your suitcase this week, and preparation doesn't even begin to describe the level of sophistication you now have for your festival packing. Could you talk us through it, please?
Emma, I don't like to boast, but I have to say, this is next level. I have made a breakthrough and my life is going to be so much easier. I don't think there's any achievement I've ever made in my life that equals this in any way.
I'm sure your daughter might have something to say about that. But basically, you've worked out how to pack neatly or efficiently. Yeah. Or effectively, or all three. So yeah. Talk us through what I would have seen, what picture I would have seen this week of how you did it.
So it's an open, you can see it on Instagram, it's an open suitcase, and in it are 5 packing cubes and about 10 books on the other side. And that's because every day I have multiple events and I have decided in advance exactly what I'm going to wear each day. So, Thursday has its own little packing cube and the books for that day are there too. And so it's so easy. You just get into your hotel room and there's a little cube for each day along with the books. And then you can just concentrate on I don't know, having a nice time.
Huge nods from Vincent. Vinny.
I mean,
here.
I'm looking at the picture now, and because this was the Obama thing in the White House, wasn't it? He only wore 2 different types of suits so that it was sort of taking down decisions and stopping decision fatigue.
Exactly, except I've got, 5 outfits for 5 days, which I think is super.
What happens if you open Thursday and you think, I'm not feeling that dress, I want something else?
That is very true. And actually, I've had that this morning, in fact. I've decided that I don't want to wear the same thing this morning to interview Simon Mayo and Jeremy Vine as I want to wear this evening to interview Tim Berners-Lee. So I'm going to substitute, I'm afraid. I'm kind of butchering a couple of outfits I've worn earlier in the week and putting those 2 together to make something.
This has gone to pieces, Gigi. This was so we launched this with a moment of sort of like surety, security, and promise, and then you've been doing this for how many days, and the wheels have fallen off.
I think I'm being resourceful and thinking on my feet.
Right, everybody, if you're in Cheltenham, talk to Georgina about her outfits. The packing cases, the packing boxes are very good as well. There's those lovely things that we're all doing. Now, Vinny, you have to grab and go quite quickly, don't you?
Go bag. Yeah.
Do you have a go bag by your door?
Yeah.
And that's the thing.
Yeah. I used to have, when I had my car, I used to live in the boot the whole time.
Yes.
And now it's sort of near the door, essentially.
I used to have one of those, and I used to have a full picnic basket in the back, just in case there was nowhere to stop for food. Always be prepared with a picnic basket, though probably a bit tricky to fit into a suitcase. And I actually met a stylist this week who styles some of the senior global correspondents for the big companies. And she said that she has 5 or 6, each correspondent has 5 or 6 grab bags, depending on war, domestic problem,
royal death,
the whole thing. So, Georgina, do you tailor or do you style your? We're not talking about books. This is dreadful. Do you style your items according to the person that you're going to meet?
Do I try and sort of dress appropriately, I suppose?
I'm trying to think of how I would think to dress for the man who invented the internet, Sir Tim Berners-Lee.
Or how to dress inappropriately for Tim Berners-Lee.
A green velvet suit.
Oh,
lovely.
Nice.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Yes, that's absolutely gorgeous.
Yesterday, when I had to have lunch and do an event with Larry Lamb, from EastEnders, and Gavin and Stacey, who's very flirty, I wore a slightly lower neckline.
Excellent.
Oof.
Wonderful. And
décolletage.
Did stuff happen?
We are lovely, lovely good friends.
Excellent. I'm delighted to hear it. Right. Okay, who are you talking to then? Elegantly dressed, obviously.
Yeah. Well, so Jeremy Vine and Simon Mayo, both kind of, radio people that have turned to murder, which is fabulous. Both excellent books, Murder on Line 1 and Black Tag. Then Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Now, one thing that I really, really learnt from his book was that he didn't invent the internet. The American military did that. What he did was invent the World Wide Web. And I had no idea that there was a difference between the two. So that's quite interesting. So we'll be chatting about that and, of course, much else. And then Charlie Mackesy. I don't know if you've ever come across The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse, beautifully kind of illustrated books, which really, I think, got everybody through COVID, and he's come up with an update of that. He'll be drawing live on stage. It sounds fabulous. I'm actually going to be in the audience this afternoon too, because Jens Stoltenberg is here, and I'm very keen to hear what he has to say. Yesterday I spoke to Cass Sunstein, who is the guy behind the nudge theory, and he's been a former advisor to Biden and Clinton, and he was absolutely fascinating. Unfortunately, he got caught in traffic and arrived 5 minutes after it should have started, so it's slightly stressful, but, fun. Is there
a theme to this year's Cheltenham Literary Festival? I mean, and indeed, how's it evolved? Because it is one of the greats that have been around it's been around for decades, hasn't it? And it transforms a very elegant but rather quiet town. And what is it? Tell us a little bit about the festival as a whole.
I think it's the world's oldest literary festival. And in fact, it's comprised of many festivals. Cheltenham sort of reinvented itself as a festival town. So you had the Jazz Festival, the Science Festival, and the Comedy Festival, and the Literature Festival. And then sort of as a separate organisation, you've got the Gold Cup, which is, of course, the huge kind of racing. And Cheltenham's also the home of Spies, GCHQ. So we always joke in most of the audience that half of them are spies. But it's a very beautiful town, and the audiences are so responsive. They come from the whole kind of area, and indeed from further afield, but always packed. I mean, I haven't had less than a completely full house while we've been here, and that goes across the board. It's everyone's finding that. It's very well run.
And apart from the spies, who's in the audience nowadays?
Who is in the audience? I mean, I suppose the demographic skews slightly older. This is a wealthy part of the country, but lots of kids activities, and it really sort of depends on the event. If it appeals to a particular demographic. I mean, for instance, I interviewed Giuliana da Empoli, who used to be the advisor to Matteo Renzi, and that was very kind of media-y. There were a lot of journalists in there, a lot of people very interested in politics. And then I had one with some polar explorers, and that was sort of mostly elderly people who wanted to kind of, I don't know, perhaps they'd actually known Shackleton. It was good. Sarah Churchwell was here. Now, she's so marvellous, and she was talking about The Great Gatsby. She's kind of, there's a new centennial edition. It's 100 years since Scott Fitzgerald published The Great Gatsby, and she's done this wonderful introduction where she just kind of strips it apart and points out that what we think we know about The Great Gatsby isn't true. We think Great Gatsby, Jazz Age, flappers, people doing the Charleston, short shimmery dresses. Actually, he wouldn't even know what the Charleston was. It wasn't invented by then. And so we're just thinking of those movie versions. Really fascinating stuff.
Georgina, we'll let you get on. Actually, no, Vinny wants to ask you a question.
Gigi, I've just noticed your post has got praise from authors like Kate Moss, the writer, and Lise Doucette, someone used to packing quick bags. She's appreciated it as well. But just one question. I think some people will be looking ahead now to buying Christmas books and gifts. It is the sort of big season for publishing. Have you got any sort of recommendations for books that you would give as gifts?
I mean, I would say that the Centennial edition, it's the Cambridge Press edition of The Great Gatsby. It's a classic. You can never go wrong with a classic. But the way that this kind of really lets you see it in a different light is a fantastic one. And The Hour of the Predator is Giuliana da Empoli's book, which is really kind of points out what's coming. The predator in his eyes is tech, and he's looking at where we're going with this. And Stuart Maconie is just such a lovely man. We sort of did a version of Desert Island Discs, but it was Desert Island Books, and he was choosing all his own books, but his kind of memoir is out too. And finally, I would really, really recommend Tim Marshall, Prisoners of Geography. It's the 10th anniversary edition of that book, and it explains how, unless you know what the world looks like physically, you can't understand the politics. And he sort of shows, Russia's aggressive because it has to have a warm water port, for instance, that kind of thing. Really, really fascinating book.
Indeed, he's had to rewrite it. It's his latest edition, isn't it? Georgina, we will let you rise and head out into the day and enjoy your trip. And you will be back fully clothed and out of bed in the seat this time next week. That's Georgina Godwin there. Thank you so much for joining us. Vinny, one quick look at another story before we go?
Yeah, this story is about the British Museum here in London, of course. It's trying to rival the Met Gala in New York, and it's launching a ball. It's sort of trying to attract big names to it, although the ticket price significantly lower. It's only but £2,000 compared to the sort of 60,000 in the Met Gala ish. Yeah, and it's about sort of raising, I think, slightly the profile, but they're using it as a fundraising exercise as well. Not sure it's the right thing to be doing. I don't know if the vibe at the moment is to see famous people attending yet another big party at a public institution. It's
pretty good for the British Museum. It's a masterstroke, some people are saying, by Nicholas Culliman, who's the museum's director. And Culliman's path has led him through Tate Modern, the Met, and then he revamped the National Portrait Gallery. So he took on the British Museum when it was mired in an awful lot of scandal, the thefts of key parts of its connection, still the ongoing toing and throwing about the Parthenon marbles and the Benin bronzes. So actually to have a British institution do something dare I say it, frivolous, I think it's quite a good idea.
It is one thing. I do think, though, that London is missing a trick in that every European city you go to these days, you pay a tourist tax, which sort of supports local institutions. That's not sort of happening here. That's happening in Edinburgh now, I think, and Manchester. But also, I do think there's an argument that, you know, as a British person, when you go to anywhere, basically on the continent now, you sort of pay for entry to museums. I do think whether or not, you know, charging for entry for people that aren't, you know, from Britain, it's not going to stop the numbers and attraction of people wanting to come, and it might sort of top up the coffers.
Vincent McAviney, thank you so much for joining me in the studio, and thanks too to Georgina Godwin in Cheltenham, and thanks to our producer and studio engineer Mariella Bevan, because that's all the time we have for Monocle on Saturday. I'll be back doing the news for Monocle on Sunday. Tyler's back in Zurich hosting from there tomorrow from Dufourstrasse 90. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good weekend.